Okay. Welcome to Orange Table Talk, another edition of our show where we engage with many different voices to talk about topical issues in Jamaica, to come up with solutions, to be a part of the solution, because all voices need to be at the table. It always starts with a conversation. And I am Patricia Duncan Sutherland, the president of the PNP Women's Movement. And I would like to start by apologizing for our late start. We were to start at 6 o'clock, but we have some very special guests with us here today. And one such guest is the leader of the opposition, Mark Golding, who was on his way from Parliament, so we wanted to wait on him. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Coming from downtown here, it was a little challenging in the rush hour, but
Yes.
sorry I'm a bit late, but we tried our best.
That's fine, and we're good. We're here, and we're going to have an exciting conversation. And today, our conversation is around time come. It's the 84th year of our anniversary of the People's National Party. And we know that the time has come where we need to be able to power the dreams of Jamaicans. And we know that to power the dreams of Jamaicans, we need to confront the biases and the prejudices that exist in our society. And one such prejudice is, and bias, is gender prejudices. And it manifests itself in inequality in our country. And so today we are here to discuss time come to power the dream of an equal society for men and women. And in the room with us today, we have a much wider audience and panelists than usual. We have with us the chair of the People's National Party, Angela Brownberg, MP. We also have the co-chair of our gender commission, Shane Grant. And then we have four ladies who in their own right have established themselves. We have Donna Marwaite, who is a math teacher. We have Georgia Crawford, who is an entrepreneur and journalist. We have Elaine Grant, who is the president of the Duncan, how could I say the wrong name? Elaine Grant is a different lady. Elaine Duncan, who is the president of the Household Helpers Association and is a household worker herself. It's Household Workers Association, help me out there. And we also have Tamika Williams, who is an entrepreneur herself. So we have quite a wide number of voices here today. And today's program is about the members of the People's National Party listening and together for us coming up with solutions. Yes. So welcome everybody. So before they get to do their little introduction, I am going to put something on the table and I want everybody to think about it. If you have heard it before, don't answer. Right? Give those who have not yet heard it. But there's a story of a man and his son who are in a terrible accident. And the man dies. And the son is rushed to hospital. And they call the surgeon. When the surgeon comes, the surgeon says, "I'm sorry, I cannot operate. This is my son." What's happening here? Uh-huh.
Angels watching over us.
Angels? Any other ideas? What could be happening? How is that possible?
Surgeon is a woman.
The surgeon is a woman. The surgeon is a woman.
Think about it.
No, and let me tell you, I've gotten so many different answers to that question. It is his stepfather. It is, the man's partner. It is all kinds of different answers. But very rarely do we get the surgeon is a woman. So kudos to you.
Thank you.
Yes, but I wanted to say that because I wanted us to, before we introduce ourselves, to be aware and cognizant that even in the most enlightened group, prejudice and biases exist. Even amongst those who are working to correct the inequalities, prejudices and biases exist. So I'm going to start at the far left with Georgia, and we will each introduce ourselves.
All right, good afternoon, or is it evening now? Good evening. My name is Georgia Crawford Williams, and I am a consultant sociologist. I'm an educator. I'm an all-round water. And most importantly, I'm a mother. I'm a mother of a son and a mother of two daughters. And when it is that I get an opportunity to speak on gender bias, and people ask all the time, in your capacity and in your line of work, do you encounter gender bias? And my answer is always yes. I encounter gender bias as it relates to the issues that we choose to focus on as policymakers, as researchers, and the issues that we choose to fund. I encounter gender bias as it relates to how we describe masculinity with terms like toxic. I encounter gender bias as it relates to how we choose to teach our boys and how we determine how they're performing, and then we start speaking about things like underperformance. I encounter gender bias as it relates to how you would speak to my son, and how you expect him to behave as a boy, and what you say to him about the things that he should do as a man. And so for me, and I am one of those persons that I'm always an advocate for this, I believe that as it relates to gender bias, we have been duped by the radical feminist, and as a consequence, we are reaping the benefits as a country. But we'll leave more of that discussion a little bit later.
Good evening, everyone. I am Donna Marwaite, teacher of mathematics at Sydney Pagan STEM Academy in St. Elizabeth. In my field, in my career, I have encountered gender bias. Being a teacher, it's always preferred to have a male teacher, especially in the field of mathematics. The males are to have the math knowledge. The males are to be the ones who lead the STEM charge. So, being a female in that area, I have learned to stand on my 2 feet very strongly. And for me, going forward, one thing I would want for us to do is to educate our youths growing about gender biases. So it is something that they will know when they come upon it, and it is something that they'll be able to correct earlier in life going forward. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is O'Shane Grant. Consider myself a very modern man. I get very drunk on sports. It's volleyball, it's football. Now I've taken on to squash. So it's all about getting rid of the fat. Fat angels seem to love me because I'm short. But the long and short of it, when it comes on to gender issues within society, they present themselves in everyday situation, but sometimes we don't recognize that the gender bias is actually at work because of how it's ingrained in us, and we really sometimes don't know how to name it or how to identify it. And I think that comes into the little bit of the hegemonic part of things. It's not only women that are discriminated against or marginalized. Men also face marginalization and discrimination. Big up to the newspaper article I saw yesterday that in a number of subject areas our boys performed exceptionally well. Something to be very, very proud of. You find as well, even for myself and how I carry myself, my own demeanor, people say, boy, Grant, me not think that is appropriate enough for a man. We're supposed to go places, can't go lock your hair, you cannot wear earring. So there are very different notions as to what a man ought supposed to do, how a man ought supposed to behave, how a woman ought supposed to behave. A principal on the radio saying she decided that the length of the skirt should be increased because it should detest from persons calling at the girls and not just factor in victim blaming. A woman is not dressing and inviting a particular conversation. So there are a number of things that sometimes we do and say without recognizing that we're actually perpetuating different forms of gender discrimination. Yeah, that's me in a nutshell, every day.
All right, I want to go to this end of the table now, and I'm going to ask you to go first, Tamika.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Tamika Williams, owner of Tiva's Boutique. In my previous 9 to 5 job, I've experienced more of a more of a gender bias as it relates to salary. There is always a gap between a male and female counterpart, even though they share the same qualifications and the same workload. You tend to see where the male counterparts get a higher salary than the female counterparts. So that's my experience. Personally, as it relates to business, I deal with mainly female colleagues, so I haven't encountered much of a gender bias. But when dealing with laborers, especially men, they tend to try to overcharge a female owner compared to a male, and that's my experience.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elaine Duncan, president of the Jamaica Household Workers Union and the 2014 Household Worker of the Year competition. And I am a household worker. Gender-based biases in my line of work is wherein in most of the households we have female doing housework. Very few men there is that does household work. And also, if I should say I want to do gardener work, society would look down on me to say that no, woman should not be doing gardener work. That should be left up to a man, and it's the same thing. First advice, so where if most men would want to work in the household, society would look down on them. So that is my gender bias in my line of work.
Good evening. I'm Angela Brownberg, chairperson of the People's National Party and member of parliament for Southwest St. Andrew. I am also a mother to 4 boys, so I'm the only female in the house, having grown up with a house where only my father was the male. So it has been an interesting switch and change from being in a house of mainly all women growing up and then now to be in a house of mainly boys. And my interest in this conversation really is to listen to the individuals who are here, participants who are here, to hear from their perspective. Because I believe that as policymakers, you know, we talk a lot about what needs to be done. And sometimes not just the data that is important, but the stories. How Jamaicans experience it, I believe, is important. And how they see the solutions, I also believe is important. So I'm looking forward to the discussion from those 2 perspectives. I also want to say I'm also interested too because, you know, there is this worldwide phenomenon. And often we grab the Sustainable Development Goals and we talk about how they show up generally, and we often don't look at how they show up differently for us in Jamaica. So we don't nationalize them and we don't make them culturally relevant. So I'm looking forward to the conversation from that perspective as well.
So, hi everyone, panelists, audience. My name is Mark Golding. I'm the president of the People's National Party and leader of the opposition. I also have the singular honor of being the member of parliament for South St. Andrew. So I approach this particular issue on the basis that historically men have been the gender that has been dominant in the privileges and opportunities that are afforded to human beings, and historically women have been disadvantaged in that regard. So I recognize that my role tonight is really to listen to the women who, as they say, who feels it knows it, and who can describe, I think, with much greater accuracy than I can, their experiences and what it is like to be a member of the female gender in our society, given the historical realities from which we are coming. There is no doubt that tremendous progress has been made in bridging the gap between the genders in terms of access to opportunities. We have a situation in Jamaica where we've had a female prime minister, we've had a female chief justice, we have the head of our military, the chief of defense staff, is a woman, and we have women occupying senior positions all across the public service, permanent secretaries, chief technical directors, etc. Many of our judges, both at the level of the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, and indeed the parish courts, are women, probably a majority at this time. Many of our doctors, many of our other professionals are women. In the world of business, women have been great entrepreneurs from day one, whether it be higglering, carrying produce and selling it that are farmed in the countryside, through MSMEs and going up, though they are not represented on an equal basis at the boardroom level in corporate Jamaica. So there's still a glass ceiling that exists, but we see women increasingly becoming senior executives, both in traditional roles that women might occupy, such as human resources or marketing, but also in areas that men would traditionally have been seen as being more the ones to fill, whether technical work around finance and that kind of thing. But despite all of that, the numbers show that women still are disadvantaged statistically in certain areas, and the reality of that we will hear, I'm sure, and we've already started to hear from people's experiences, is that they have encountered some amount of bias. And I accept that in the home, in Jamaica, typically, the role that men and women play is not equal or not the same. Men typically are expected to do certain things and behave a certain way. That's how they were acculturated and grown up. And women also had their roles that they were expected to play. And so these are areas which I think warrant further discussion and analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we should have a very rich discussion today. And I just want to say I'm encouraging all of you online who are watching on Facebook, on Instagram, on YouTube. Thanks for joining us, as well as we want to hear from you as well. And as you make your comments, the production team will share them with us so we can comment on that as well and to take that into consideration. So, on the point of statistics and what do we know about our gender situation in Jamaica, just to put a little background and color to where we are at. And Georgia, you touched on it a bit, in Jamaica right now, 80% of our university graduates are women. 60% of our middle managers are women. So why are we having this conversation? Could be a question. But we are having the conversation because that is a gender imbalance as well. But that gender imbalance, that you would think that, okay, so it means that the thing has shifted and it's a different problem that we have, is not totally that. Because right now we must remember that we are almost 1-to-1, man to woman. We love to say in Jamaica, say 7-to-1, because that was a good justification for some behavior. But it is really 1-to-1 and has always been 1-to-1, man to woman in Jamaica, roughly 51-49, but that's where we are at. But with all of that information, right now in Jamaica, 78% of men are active in the workforce, but only 67% of women are active. That's an imbalance that we have to fix too as well. And we have to understand why that imbalance still exists, even though women are more qualified. And then, unemployment. 12% of the women are unemployed versus 7% of men. So women are overrepresented in the unemployed, underrepresented in the employed, overrepresented in the unemployed. All right? And despite equal pay for equal work, you alluded to it, Tamika, women get paid less than men for the same job in Jamaica, about 20% less. Every time you say that, people say like, no man, I'm not true that. Because yes, there are some women who get the same pay as some men. But in general, for job, even on the construction site, women get paid less than the men, job for job. All right? So, when we look on it and we ask, there was an article in All Woman some time ago, and they asked some of the HR managers what caused the wage disparity for women. And when you hear some of these things, you wonder. So one manager said, I'm saying this in confidence. So they didn't want to reveal who they were. Employers see male staff as more valuable, even though many won't admit it. A recruiter for a digital company told All Woman, on the condition that his name not be published. In my kind of industry, for example, the workers would have to be available on call 24/7, and I've found that men are more reliable for this kind of work than women are. So when we look at the gender construct, you alluded to it, Mark, that the roles that we have set out for men and women in our society, who does what in the home, impacts what happens in the workplace and impacts the possibility of equality. So we want to think about some of those things as well. The other thing is, when he was pressed to explain, men won't have to leave work to pick up their children. They don't get PMS or mood swings. They won't call to say their children are sick so they can't go to work, or they have to attend PTA meetings. And I'm being brutally honest with you. These are things employers think about in the hiring process. So wondering now who is thinking about the children in the hiring process, because 55% of households are led by women in Jamaica. So if they can't work because they have to look after the children, then what happens? Right? So they also have, it's not bias per se, but more about the risk of having to consider factors like attrition that would cause that. It's difficult to invest in a worker, train them, and then have them leave. And women leave in larger numbers than men, and often for domestic reasons. So you naturally find that the investment in wages and training and the like in women is less, because women come with encumbrances. So when having an honest conversation, these things come out, right? But we still have to deal with why we don't have that, why we don't have our boys in school, all right? And we also have to note as well that in our poverty, among our poor, for every 100 poor men, we have 120 poor women. So we have a gender imbalance right across poverty. So it's a real problem that we have to solve, because if we have equal amount of man and woman in our society, we have to work out how to make life equal for everybody all the time. All right? So this is going to be a little different today, because we have 3 tables here today. And myself and Mark are going to listen first, and we're going to go to Angela's table first. And Angela is going to have a discussion around what they are seeing in their world, and to bring out from them what kind of solutions would they want to see coming out of our structures.
Okay, so ladies, you've heard the introduction from Tricia. I just wanted to get from you. You've started a little bit of that conversation already, but just expand a little bit more about how that gender bias that we have been talking about, that discrimination, how does that show up for you? Whether it is at work, at home, what has that experience been like?
The experience is of a negative one, in which even earlier on when growing up, for me, the female would be told to do most of the chores, while the boys would be outside playing marbles or with their gigs and so on. So I think that should be changed by the way how mothers now raise their sons. They should raise them in a way for them to know that it is okay to help to do the chores inside the house. And I think that would help with lessen the gender violence that we are now seeing in society, where men are abusing females. And I think part of it is because the men do not want to help out where they're supposed to help out.
Okay. Yeah. You want to give us your perspective, Tamika?
And I just want to ask everybody to hold your mic as close as possible. Get some feedback online that our volume is a little low. Am I correct? Yes, so just hold up your mic a little closer to your mouth.
Okay. So as it relates to the gap in salary, even though I believe personally that if it's the same qualifications, same experiences, and the same workload, I don't see why the male should be paid higher than a female, because it's the same qualifications, same workload, and the same experience. And sometimes some females are even more qualified have more experience than their male counterparts. So I feel that they should enforce an equal pay scale for both male and female workers.
I wanted to ask you in that regard, though, because Jamaica has boasted for years that we had same equal pay for equal work, and we are now hearing that story. I kind of wanted to find out, did you realize it in the beginning? How did you come to recognize that you're doing the same work but not actually getting the same pay?
Okay, so while working in the 9 to 5, it's the same job title, and then we were at lunch discussing pay, and each person were telling, like, how much they receive, and then you realize there's a gap between the male and the female. It's the same title, same qualifications, and the same experience, because it was mainly like an entry-level position.
Well, it was the same for me. Once when I was working at a canteen, and you have males in there, we were all doing the same work, but still the male would get the most pay. So I am like everybody else. I am in agreement that equal pay for equal work.
And that's one side of the story, because the other side of the story, too, is around what women or girls are encouraged to do. So girls should be nurses and the boys should be doctors.
Oh yes, women places in the household. That's what we were
absolutely.
socialized to know growing up, that that's where you're supposed to be. You're not supposed to be out there doing the construction or driving the bus or being the manager, or being the politician. You must just stay at home.
Elaine, I'm glad you raised that, because when you were talking earlier about how many of us grow our boys not to do their household chores and to be outside playing,
Yes,
I was
girls
wondering if you
stays.
thought that the girls should also be going outside, or is it that we just need to share the
Equally
household work
share the chores, share the responsibility,
and the different types
and
of
the different types of responsibility. Yes.
Okay, thanks for that.
All right, over to you now, Shane. Let's get a little perspective here, and then we're going to come back together and have a conversation.
Even again. All right, so, George, I want to start with you now, because you said something very, very interesting. We've been duped by radical feminism. So I'm wondering if why is it that women's involvement for many persons seem as if it's an attack on men?
No, not at all. The reality, though, is that men have been under attack. And I think that we have been so socialized for the past 2 or 3 decades that, men are the villains, that we don't even see that we have been attacking our men and emasculating our men. And that as a consequence, they believe that the only way to fight back is to either be hypersensitive or hyper-masculine, which leads to aggressiveness. But, one of the things I believe is most important is what Angela said about the tailoring of the information, the knowledge, the theories that we are being given by the international realm to our own society, and we don't do that. So, for instance, Patricia made mention of the fact that if you look at the statistics, we have far more men, well, not far more, about 20% more men in the workforce than women. But the reality is that in Jamaica, as researchers such as Nancy Gonzalez would prove, the men are more likely to quote and unquote mine a woman. So a woman would not be working, but would still be earning, in the real sense of the word, because there's a man that will actually contribute to her well-being, whether it is her man or her man for today or whatever is happening, not necessarily the father of our children, because we cannot ignore the fact that there are problems as it relates to men and standing up as it relates to looking after their children continuously, because statistics will show that the men have improved dramatically as it relates to stepping up as a father and being on the birth certificate and, carrying them to the first day of school. But the majority, of course, tend to be part-time father. You take a picture, you put it on social media, right, that sort of thing. So those issues they have, but they still mind women, using the Jamaican term. And so as a consequence, a woman can stay home and therefore is still earning and cannot be called, quote and unquote, in the normative sense, unemployed. And then when we talk about poverty and who is poor, when we talk about the fact that there are more poor women than poor men, but you'll find that a poor man will still have the responsibility of 2 or 3 poor women. Of course, his own choice, yeah? But he does have that. So when it is that we look at what we think are discrepancies, we have to look at what the Jamaican culture is, what the Jamaican reality is, so that we can understand what is really happening. Now, for me, the statistics that are important are the ones that talk about who is more likely to die. The worst thing that can happen to you, unless it's your time, is death. Yeah? Who is more likely to be injured, to be a victim of criminality? Who is more likely to drop out of school? You know, those are all men. And yet when it is that I hear about interventions, I am hearing about interventions focused on our women. Our girls, for the most part, in comparison to our men, are empowered. Our boys are in a crisis. There's a crisis of masculinity and men in Jamaica, which affects women. Because if it is that our men don't know how to behave, then women will have to take up the mantle. Yeah? And then we have dual roles. You know, and Oakley would speak about the triple burden of a woman. And so she has to actually go out and work and still be in charge of looking after her children and still be, you know, the one emotionally keeping the family together, because the man is not there picking up his responsibility. Yeah? And that is a part of the crisis, and it affects women, but we don't see it. We are, you know, out there busy, I am woman, hear me roar. And that's a problem.
Well, ladies out there, continue roaring, yes? Ensure that you continue roaring and continue the good fight. Miss Wade, now, coming off what Georgia just said a while ago, and thinking about it and what Azra Nora said some years ago, that domestic work done in the home, not someone is paid with, should be considered as real work, and man minding woman. How much of domestic work you think should be considered as real work and compensated? Or is man really just fool, or they actually paying for the domestic work?
Wow. You know, my mind went wild when you asked those questions just now. But for me, I would really say that a woman ought to be paid if she's at home doing domestic work. But I will switch it and say a man ought to be paid too if he's a stay-at-home dad. Because I hear of my male friends saying to me, I would really prefer to be a stay-at-home dad now. Yeah. Yes. And have my wife go out and earn and bring the bread home.
Crisis of masculinity.
I'm not sure it's a crisis of masculinity.
So, you know, and going again, I saw a video some time ago I was sharing with some colleagues of mine where it says we're raising our women to be men. And, you know, coming off of what Georgia said, that video came back to my mind, and that is a powerful statement. We're raising our women to become men, because we're telling them, you need to know to stand on your own 2 feet. You need to know to live without a man. You need to know to raise your children without a man. And that now, it has some disparity. Because as a young female growing up, I'm going to say, I no longer need a man in my household.
But how much of that is preparation to say that you might end up get a careless man who just cut left? So yeah, it's preparing you to be able to fulfill those roles. That if the man did actually did, they wouldn't have to carry everything yourself.
That is true. But in the common sense of it all, both parents are needed. Even if he's careless, he plays a part. Trust and believe. As an educator, I can tell you, when my students come to me, especially my boys, I love my boys. I prefer my boys.
That's why the man them do so well that the CXC, the teacher them actually ready to know.
You know, and I will always say, my boys can come to me and talk to me about anything. And sometimes the stories I get, and when you hear the many roles the mother has to play, and the frustration that comes with all of that, when she has to come to school for a behavioral issue, and she comes and she's frustrated, she's angry. It's not necessarily angry with her son, but it's just all the baggage that she has to be carrying. If that man was there, eventually he would have to take some of that baggage and carry it as well.
Jaja, we always hear about mothers fathering. Is it possible for a father to mother?
Not at all. It is not possible for a father to mother. He can do the best he can. Yeah? But the reality, just as she said, is that both parents are needed. And when we speak about policies, the policies must be geared towards maintaining the family unit because it is extremely important. The fact that we have ignored the family unit for such a long time is a big problem, and we are seeing that. You know, my friend here, oh dear, I forgot his name, up at the University of Western, is it Mark Figueroa, did a wonderful study about discipline and fathers and the importance of a father to the discipline of a child. And he spoke about the fact that many of our boys go wayward because by the time they reach third form, if they're from single parent homes, which is usually matrifocal, meaning mother-led homes, you find that them taller than their mother and them voice deeper than their mother, you know? And so at third form, the boy, them kind of get mad. You know it. You know, by third form, them kind of get wild, you know? And you really need to stand up, you know, on them. And you find that many times the mothers are unable to stand in the way because women are nurturers for the most part. You know, the things that a woman would bypass. You know, I remember once my brother came home, you know, chip up. Say that him and him friend them was just walking from KC and a madman decided to run them down. Some rubbish like that, and he fell and him chip up. And my mother was like, oh, poor thing. You know, she hugged him and she kissed him. My father said, no, you know, it's rubbish that. Look upon the chip them. You know, she said, the boy no want to pay bus fare and doctor kick him off a bus. Now, I don't know if that's the truth. But the reality is that in that particular instance, as a man, he understood boys. And similarly, as a woman, you need, as a girl, you need to have a man to show you how it is that males are to deal with you as a woman. There are so many girls that don't understand a relationship because all them do is yearn for a man, any man, because they had no man in their household.
All right. I want to, you have one more thing that you want to add to that?
I was just about to ask if this whole notion of capitalism and who is it that controls the capital, the means of production. So because it's men that predominantly has access to wealth and we kind of keep it in a particular way, if that is the reason why women have this great disparity in wages.
You know, I wouldn't say, I would say it's just that society has caused us to believe that certain roles, certain careers are for men. And we have continued in that area. You know, as Angela said earlier, doctors are the males, nurses are the females. I was admitted in the hospital a couple of years ago, and a male nurse came to my bed, and I was like, Doc, you know, I came out of surgery, and I was waking up. I was like, Doc? And he's like, no, I'm nurse so-and-so. I was like, okay. You know, because we are told to believe that the doctors must be the males and the nurses must be the females. And, you know, afterwards I had to apologize and say, you know, I'm not used to seeing a male nurse, but I salute you because that took a lot of strength, in my opinion, because they must have discriminated, you know, you must have gone through something in college to actually graduate and say, you know, are a male nurse. And for me, I had to apologize to him and say to him, you know, boy, hats off to you, sir, because you are in a quote-unquote female-dominated field. And for me, that for the careers there, I believe we as society, we just need to have an open mind where that is concerned and just have our children growing up go where they are comfortable. Because now I have girls who are in the auto mechanic department. And I say, yeah, girl, go, because Miss Wait can change our tire. And Miss Wait can tell if something wrong with our car. And, you know, I salute my girls when they go into building construction, because it's not now just a male-dominated field. But girls put on their tough shoes and they're out there. And the boys will go into foods. Because I tell them, you know, chefs are paid high. And I tell them from early, I say, what you want to become, tell me. And when I talk to them in class, I said, yes, Chef Dryden, talk to me what you say. And that's how I speak their truth and their future into them. So it's a disparity that we have learned and we have grew up on, but it's something that we can change. And I try to be that change.
All right, and I'm putting it back here now because I want us to have a conversation. A lot of controversial things have been said, and we have come up with a lot of problems that we are seeing in our society. But I want us to acknowledge and understand gender is a construct. Huh? It's a social construct. Yeah. So the role of a man and the role of a woman in society is a social construct defined by us. And we set that system. So when a man gets emasculated in that role, it's because the system is starting to redefine and the role has to be redefined. And we have not, so yes, the feminists have started to do more and do more in university. So the man feels, well, where's my place? But that's because we have not effectively defined now what is a gender partnership to get gender parity and gender equality. And that's where I want us to shift, if we can begin to shift our minds to think about that, not about restoring the gender construct, but shifting the gender construct to cause gender equality. Right now the construct is unequal. Right now the construct says woman is nurturer and in charge of the home, man is gatherer and in charge of providing. That's the construct we are working in. If we shift that construct to say that we are partners in doing both, and we can choose what part of it we do, whether we are house husband or housewife, or we are both working and we work out a different way for child care, but we must then redefine the family unit and redefine the partnership. What would allow us to be able to do that? And I'm going to start with you if you have any ideas in that area. It's on.
Yeah, just turn it back on. That's a big question. Well, truthfully, what we're hearing is that what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman, other than the biological side of it, which is also controversial in certain countries, but here in Jamaica, I think we're, for the most part, feel that we're fairly clear on that. But in terms of the role-playing functions and responsibilities of a particular gender, that has shifted and continues to shift. And how we and the society responds to that is the issue, because in some instances it's a very positive thing, and it has empowered a lot of women in particular to do different things and to achieve more and to be able to express themselves and their talents in a more meaningful way. On the other hand, for men, the issues arise, well, what is the role that we're expected to play? You just said men are considered to be the ones primarily responsible as the providers to the family. If that is no longer so, then what is their role? Because women who have traditionally been the nurturers and are now increasingly becoming the providers, there is a certain reality to the nurturing role. I think Georgia made the point that a man can never be a mother, because there are men, of course, who do end up having to be the mother because there's no mother and they're responsible for their children and they're trying their best. But can they effectively play that role? I don't know. I think I'd like to hear from you all. In terms of the law, though, one thing I would say is that we've had equal pay for equal work as a legal right since the mid-70s. But like many other areas, the question of enforcement of those rights and the access to those rights is what really matters. And domestic violence is another area. We have laws that prohibit domestic violence. We even have special procedures to protect victims of domestic violence in our law. But the reality is that many cases of domestic violence continue for long periods of time because the victims, for one reason or another, would prefer, rightly or wrongly, to stay in that situation, as bad as it is, rather than really go and assert their rights. Or maybe they don't have a means to assert them, or they're afraid to assert them. So providing effective mechanisms by which persons can assert their rights and have the full benefit of those rights is often more important than the easy part of it, which is creating those rights in law. We're quite capable of passing laws to create rights, and we've done it in a variety of areas. Most recently, in the Sexual Harassment Act that was passed, and creating offenses around sexual harassment, creating a specific tribunal to hear those matters and so on. It's not yet up and running, as I understand it, but the realities are, in the workplace, we have a whistleblower law to protect whistleblowers where an employer is doing bad things, and an employee wants to achieve justice but is afraid that they might be victimized, and the law protects them specifically if they go and blow the whistle on that matter. In Jamaica we call that informing, and that's a very negative connotation around that. But how effective is this whistleblower law? How many cases have actually been presented where that has been a protective device? I suspect very few. So I think we need to go as a society to deal with the harder issues, which is how do we make these things work in the way they were intended? We tend to be too satisfied that we have achieved it by just making it beyond the books.
Yeah. I'm really glad that Mark went there, because the truth is that you can't legislate away cultural reality. And that's part of our problem, that we have been making these laws, but we haven't been dealing with the underlying assumptions, what is in here, what we grow up and think is the right thing, the role of the man, the role of the women, how we engage each other. And one of the things we have not done really in Jamaica, and this class and color thing is a big deal, but I believe that we're not going to get it right until we go back and look at our colonial past, the role of our men, how they were treated, the role that they were relegated to. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were asked to be studs. Yeah, so there was nothing about fathering in there. They were just to make sure they plant a seed, and often that was it. And then for generations that has been in the psyche of our men, and all of a sudden now we're coming to this new thing now and we want to do that. And I say that because when I said earlier that we pull these things, these international campaigns that we're doing without looking at what is our reality, because many of those other countries where they're doing that don't have that past, don't have that intergenerational role of men to deal with. So we're putting the laws and we're putting this, but how do we get men now to understand the role that they really need to play as part of that family unit? For generations, they had to develop a detachment so that when they were moved or their kids were sold, that it wouldn't hurt and it wouldn't be a problem. So how do we deal with that now? So that is for me, at the heart of what we need to look at before we can make some of these other things work.
I don't want to talk too much, but just to add, that it's not just about how do we get our men, but we also how do we get our women, who are often the over, what is it, 55%? They're the head of the household. Yes. So they're the ones primarily acculturating their children in the home, at least. How do we get our women to recognize what ought to be the way to raise a boy so that he understands his role and so on?
Don't run with the father.
Well, these are issues. So it's not just about getting the men to understand. It's also about getting the women, in fact, the whole society to understand.
Absolutely.
How do we do this? So I want to come over here. So some of your ideas around it. I want to put two things on the table here that you can think about. Wage transparency. Another legislation, yes, but enforcement, that every time a job is advertised, the pay is advertised with it, would help the woman's ability to negotiate and to know what range they should be in. Because sometimes it's a negotiation that makes you end up at the lower end. And even then, you would probably end up at the lower end because we haven't done the work yet to empower you enough to negotiate and know your worth. You know your worth in contributing work, but not know your worth in being paid for the work. But think around that. Think around what else do we need on the ground to help us to be able to report domestic violence. Because I will tell you a story. My cousin, who is a victim of domestic violence, I was helping her. Her sister came out to help her to get it reported. The first experience is the first policewoman they went to. All right? Said to her, "How what you do the man? Make him lick you." So they left that police station, went to another police station. And the policeman said, all right, because the color thing did come into, because the cousin who is being abused is adopted, dark-skinned. The cousin who is her sister is light-skinned. So she go in first and talk to the policeman. The policeman said, okay, I will take the report. Policeman takes the report. But after taking the report and all of that, she says, okay, now I want a restraining order. You have to go to court, and you get a court date 1 month's time. Now, if she didn't have family and somewhere to go to, she would have to go back home to that man having reported him to the police. Yeah, that is correct. Because if she go back home, because she had done it one time before and went back home and take the lick. So this time now she had a little backative. And that process took us 6 weeks. She ended up going back to the gentleman, you know, I must tell you, because she said she loved him. And that's what she knew as love. So there is a conversation occurring. And then I had a conversation with the gentleman and said, but you know, I never knew it was wrong to beat her. I said, yes, it's wrong. And so that's a continuous conversation, but I bring that to putting these things on the table. Because as we are considering changing our gender construct, unless we want to go back to that gender construct, it's not necessarily about emasculating the man, but how do we redefine the roles? You know? And I'm going to put it out there. I have some ideas, but I'm going to put it back here. How we redefine.
Well, you know, any redefinition must be done in the context of how it will affect the stability of our society. And many times when it is that we start to make policy, we become very myopic and we think about the here and now and we don't look at the long term. Nor do we compare others who have implemented similar policies and how it has impacted them. And I'm sorry, I've not been looking in the camera. Is that fine? I'm having a conversation. But all right, we'll do. Yes. But I ask a question, what happens when it is that we now say that the man is no longer protector, provider, and the woman is the nurturer? Let's look at some of the countries that has been happening. If you look at the United States, they have been foremost in pushing the redefinition of the family, where the woman can be out there as much as the man, and you know, so just as a man and a woman are exactly the same as it relates to how they can be viewed. But the reality is that the consequences of that for even the woman herself has been disastrous. There has been an increase a large increase in the amount of depression that has been reported by women in the USA. There has been a vast increase as well in the amount of them who have tried suicide. If you look at the birth rate has been continuously falling among all the first world countries. And when we speak to that, remember, as Jamaica, a much smaller country, we do not have the wherewithal of Canada to import workers. And the reality is that if a woman is outside working continuously, she's not just going to have less children. Many of our women are having no children at all. Yeah, especially because now, as was said earlier by my colleague, you're being told that you don't need a man. And so it becomes shameful to even try to, quote and unquote, get a man. In Jamaica, you say, look a man, and look here, look man. Yeah? And when it is that a man now approaches you, you have been so conditioned that you don't need a man around. Even though you just tell your friends say you're lonely and you would like a man. When he says hi, you say, no, I don't want your number. No, I'm not going to give you mine. No, I'm not going to meet you nowhere. And no, I don't want none of your time. No. Yeah, that is what is happening. And the reality is that we end up with empty homes, with facing, if you look at Jamaica's statistics on birth rate, we are having a falling birth rate mixed with migration. What is going to happen to our workforce? What is going to happen if it is that our women start focusing only on the job market? And I'm not here at no point at all encouraging women not to work. But if it is that the woman becomes the protector and the provider solely, you leave college at 19, you can't have a baby. That's how you start thinking, you can't have a baby because you just get to work. Yeah, you just get to work, you start work a little bit, you start saying, I can't get no baby because I just get the first promotion. Yeah, you get the first promotion, you are going with it, you can't have no baby because maybe I get the promotion, I don't want them to take me and left, so I forgot by the time you reach 35, you just start look a man. Yeah, the man at 35, I look for the woman who are 22. I'm just saying that any redefinition.
George, I'm going to interrupt you right here, so that construct only occurs because you can't stay in the job because the employer's attitude to you being in the job. If you could have your baby and there was no undertone of, because although we have maternity leave, because of the gender construct in our society, then the employer says, you know what happened? I now employ a woman here, so if she's going to say she's going to have a family. And so the woman then makes a choice not to create the family because of it. So one feeds the other. I would put it to you that the way that you are going to get change and shift your gender construct so that you can have gender equality is you're going to have social workers on the ground having that conversation. You're going to have that conversation in schools. You're going to have to redefine in the schools so that there can be a new choosing of how we relate to each other and a new mindset. Now I want to bring in the gender specialist here because I study this thing.
All right, so let me say, my family has accused me significantly of making an attempt at the family surviving. 31, no bikini. I can tell you that every single Father's Day and my birthday can look forward to my cousins and everybody say to me, when I go get a youth, the man in plan dance, anytime something go on for me, a big bashment. But in truth, majority of my generation cannot afford to have a child. By the time you work out repaying your student loan and you work out paying for an apartment, all right, say that if you can reach apartment standings, you go and pay rent. By the time you don't work out the food, say you don't live near job, near where you work, you have to work out transportation. By the time you add up all those little bills, and you go get another hungry belly picnic to put on that. Picnic can't tell you out a door for him grass and later on they move him and take him drink some water, you know. And because some of us have made a careful consideration that we don't want our kids to go through the same sort of struggles that we experienced. And there are people that say, well, your mother did struggle with you. That no means that we want to make me struggle too.
It's the response that we do. I think that's for me, I am alarmed. I'm sorry. I am alarmed at it because it speaks to how we have prioritized children and childbirth. So when it is that I have to choose a bill that I would have to pay, do I choose this apartment that costs this much, or do I decide that I'm going to have a child, so I have to have a cheaper thing? So the policies, and I agree with Patricia that the policies are important, but if it is that we do not socialize our people to understand the importance of family, the importance of reproduction, the importance of continuing and making the sacrifice to do that, then the result is that you might not get additional money when you're 48,
So, all right. So, George, Georgia, 2 is better than 2 minutes. Work. Good! Because it was a social transformation story. And it's the same thing that we are saying. Which is why I'm glad you see when Mark called me and said, will you be a deputy in the shadow cabinet? And that's why I said social transformation is what I want. Because this is going to be critical to how we're going to unlock everything else. You can't, education alone can't unlock it, as we can see, right? To shift our tendency towards violence, we need to cause a social transformation because it is because of an exclusion. So some of our boys are feeling excluded, and so then become members of the gang, so then move there. So we have a lot of work to do in this regard, a whole heap of work to do in this regard. Right? But the point that is being made here is also a bigger point, right? That if you can't afford it, you won't have the children because you want to give your children what they deserve. And so we can't underestimate that means. So therefore, when we look at our policies and when we look at our implementation, we have to look at how are we
Incentive
enabling
for
young people?
first-time buyers.
How are we enabling young people to live a good life?
Yeah, I mean, I'd also just add, though, in how we frame and how we consider this matter, I think we need to interrogate the assumption that it's very important for us to reproduce, that everyone must reproduce. Because the reality is that the population of the world has expanded and is continuing to expand. The world has finite physical resources and capacity to sustain life. When I was a student at high school, the population of the world was 3 billion. It is now, I think, over 7. We're having climate change, we're having food insecurity, and so on. At independence, our population was 1.5 million people. Our GDP per capita was roughly what it is now, I've been reading. We're now closer to 3 billion. So, you know, if a young man or a young woman says, I would prefer to defer having children until I'm in a position to support them in a way that I feel is right for them, I think personally that's a prudent and responsible approach. Whether the state can make it easier for people to achieve that kind of security, that's where I think we'd love to go. But while we get there, I wouldn't deplore that mental approach, because I think that is helping the society to avoid some of the problems that we have with people who are careless about the issue of having children and have children and they're really not able to look after them, and you have children out there who are suffering because they do not have that kind of support. I just wanted to make that.
No, and that pressure is what leads people to talk about a woman being a mule because she gets to an age and doesn't have a child, and puts that kind of pressure on a young man. So, I mean, we have to see from both sides. I like the idea of a social worker, and that deals with those whose ideas have already been formed. The truth is that a lot of persons, we talk about gender biases and so on, will say, oh, I'm tired of talking about it, we're tired of doing that kind of work. I think it was Donamar who said that we have to have the kind of conversation with our children and with each other where we see the biases for what they are. I raise it because many people will say, oh, it is time to move from talking about it to get to somewhere else, without understanding the importance of actually talking through it. Because every day somebody new comes along whose eyes need to be opened or who needs to have the conversation. The truth is that part of our problem also is that we don't know how to value each other and how to respect each other, because we're so used to this kind of hierarchical society where I have the power so I can do anything to you and say anything to you. So we don't know whether it is man and woman, mother and child, father and child, brother, sister, how to have that conversation. Because if we did respecting each other, many of the problems we have we really wouldn't have, because we'll be able to stop for a moment and look at it from your perspective and probably behave differently.
And to go back to your point, Angela, that you made around our history, our historical roles really have defined. So the construct that we have is not a typical social construct of a first world country. Our gender construct says that man produce enough picnic. That's what they do, and just have them several. So a man accept that he must support 3, but not have 1 baby mother, right? So we know we have a lot of that conversation. And some women also know that they must have multiple baby fathers, so they can have different sources of income, right? Yes, so the two sides of the coin
It don't
are
always
there.
work out like that. It don't always work out like that because they have the 3 and the 4 different baby fathers, but yet still not getting anything. Because I remember my mom was telling us a story where one lady said, you know, sometimes I'm not getting anything much, you know. It's just maybe a bread and some sugar, that's all. But in today's day, I wouldn't want just bread and sugar for my children. I want the best for them, educational wise up there, and provide them with all the necessary things to let them be successful. And in my case, I'm similar to him. I think the same way that if you cannot afford to have children, you should not have children, because a lot of children are out there suffering, including when I was growing up. the things that I always wanted, my parents could not afford to give them to me, and that at times made me annoyed. I get annoyed with them for not able to provide for me. And I'm saying to them, then why did you bother to have children if you cannot afford children? So we need to look at that part.
And I also want to look at that very carefully as well, because then that we could be sending a signal. If you're poor, you should not reproduce.
No.
Is that a reality? No. So we have to be careful how we manage that conversation. It's an ideal conversation. Yes? But yeah?
It reminds me of the legislation in Barbados when they had medical termination. One of their consideration was the present situation of the would-be parents and their foreseeable situation. So if you realize your level of education, your skill sets, not going to afford you an opportunity to earn at a particular level. And as far as we always expect inflation and things are always go up, because the world is too capitalist. And then when you look on those things, you say, boy, maybe the best thing for you is to have an abortion. And then people look on it and say, boy, really and truly, we can't even afford ourselves. Not that abortion should be used as a contraceptive, but sometimes you have to have real conversation to see, because there's a difference between R-E-E-L and R-E-A-L. Some of the things that we tell people, say, have a picnic, I will work out. That is just fiction, that is just TV. And then you wonder, why is it that you see these people on the roadside? Why is it that people are... So when you think about those, when you talk about, just to touch on the beating part of it, everything you do wrong in the home as a youth growing up, you have to get licked. And then they tell you, say, the Bible say, what? Spare the rod and spoil the child. And then they tell you, say, a little beating don't hurt nobody. But then you realize that every single situation in the home is resolved round the straps. And when them can't catch the strap, they catch the broomstick, them tell them go cut the switch. Me that make sense. When we cut the switch, me giant that, as they lick that pop. But one of the difficult things is that from slavery, everything that we did to rob Massa of his labor, his free labor that he's not paying for, you get a look at saltfish eat and the scraps, was result in beating or some form of punishment that was very physical. So now, for all of our generations, when we look on it, how we resolve conflict situations, you go get some licks, so the man goodly feel like it's perfectly
that
normal.
was exactly what he was saying, but she's not behaving herself. What should I do?
Hey, and then pick me.
And you know,
conversation.
something I've seen and something I've experienced, because I went to an all-girls school. I went to boarding school. And we always sit and... I'm a proud product of Hampton School. And we would sit and have our conversations. And sometimes I would just not speak, because I grew up in a single-parent home. And when I would hear girls say, oh, you know, mommy and daddy, and mommy and daddy took us to the park and we did this, and I'm like, my mommy just sent me come to school and I'm getting my education to get my way out. So, you know, the socialization once again that we come to, we need to re-socialize our society to say that you don't have to go to Hope Gardens to have family time. Right. You can go outside. You can't just walk down the street. And going back to the same beating, I thought about that. I got some beatings growing up. And I was a tomboy because I had sisters, but then we never played with dolls. We played outside, and mommy had dogs, so we played with the dogs, and we climbed trees and all of that. And if you did something wrong, the belt, and you go for the belt. And we grew up on that, and then my sister now with her kids, they sit and resolve issues. And I'm like, sis, what you doing? We did not grow up that way. Where's the belt? And she said, no, we need to change it. Yeah. And then I sat and I thought, and I was like, we really need to re-socialize ourselves as adults so that our children growing up will grow up with quote-unquote love. Because we grew up with love, but we grew up with tough love. Yes. And then that's why, as a lot of my colleagues would say, we face it out there in the classrooms because the students only know tough love. Yeah. So sometimes you embrace your students and they must be so you know, and they prefer you shout at them because that is what they know.
For sure. That's why I say we need an army of social worker, not an army of soldier. Yes. I want to bring you into the conversation. I want you to give us a comment on what you have been hearing and what's coming up for you as you're listening.
Okay.
Hold up your mic.
Based on what was said by each and every one, I do agree in terms of we need to re-socialize from, I think we should start from home, really. As in, get social workers out there to sit and talk with from as early as 3 years old coming up. Because most times as tough love, and that's what they called it, but I really don't believe in tough love. I believe that children should be told that they are loved. You should show love. You should show respect to kids just as much as you'd want them to show respect to you as a elder. And as such, most times we tend to shun kids from expressing themselves. And then we tend to say why they don't share certain stuff with us, but it's the way we grow kids where we don't allow them to express themselves. So when that important matter arrives and they would like to express themselves, they tend to shy away because they'll say, mommy won't believe or daddy won't believe. And they tend to become more reserved, and it affects how they communicate with their peers as well, how they function in the work world as well, and just as a whole. So I think that allowing kids to express themselves, guiding them on the right path, and being respectful, and you show love in return, hug them as much, kiss them, tell them that you appreciate them too. I think that will help them to become healthier adults.
Definitely. I mean, it's one of the things I think we suffer with in Jamaica, that we do not actually acknowledge children as human beings.
Sure.
We actually treat them as things that we own. We don't understand that they have the same feelings we have. We expect that they should be able to be resilient, to we say, get up now. When we are getting up in the morning, and it's hard for us to get up one morning, we are okay, we roll slowly out of bed. But make we go in the bedroom, and we say, come up, get up. You never hear me say, get up. And you expect an immediate response.
And seen and not heard.
Yes.
I was going to say, I like the idea of the social worker, but I want us to be very careful about this social worker all over the place, because a social worker can't take the place of mother in the home. And part of what we have to do is empower them. So I believe that we need to have social workers, not just going out and going in. I think we need to have the kind of action that is aimed at re-socializing from your prenatal clinic, in the schools, at the church, in the communities, all over. And we need to also empower people to understand that you don't have to have no real training. As you said, there are some basic things. Listen, show love, talk it out. Just some things like those that people begin to understand that those are important and that those can shift the needle too. There's power, there's power in conversation. And we need to empower people to have that kind of open conversation.
I just want to just run to the solutions and the policies, because I heard about the social transformation, which I think is one of the most important points. For us to determine though our policies, we have to see in our heads the society that we want to build. Yeah? And so what is the transformation geared towards? And when we speak for me, when it is that I look at our society, I believe we already understand what the family should look like for us to have a stable society. It is a man, a woman, and for Jamaica, the 2 children policy was marvelous. It worked really well. As a social intervention, our birth rate fell from 5 point odd to 2 point little bit. But now we are going under 2. And for a population to maintain itself, each woman has to have 2 children. If it is that she does not, then she does not reproduce herself and her partner. And so we have to look at what it is that our society ought to look like in the future. What is it that we need to build? How can our economy grow if we don't have people that work. Yeah, people that are going to grow up of different age groups. And remember, we're living longer. And so if it is that we have no young persons, then we're going to have, we know as what they call a sandwich generation. So you're trying to look after your elderly parent and look after the one child that you have, and so you become the sort of depressed individual that we're seeing all across the first world, yeah? And so the policies that I want to implement are geared at building the nuclear family as a part of the extended family. We forget how important the extended family was to the maintenance of order and stability to the unit. Yeah, I want to think about policies like flexi work, because flexi work allows the woman to look after her child and be a nurturer, and also to do her work. If you look at the majority of us, talk truth about work, 3 hours. 4 hour, 5 hour, you could have really put it in and then go home and do your thing, or you could work from home for a part of it, that sort of thing. But that allows the woman to nurture. It allows her to see what is happening in her household, because sometimes you're there work till 8 o'clock, you don't understand what is happening because you don't see a child at all. You don't understand, you can't have the conversations that you're talking about. If it is that we don't have men who are willing to work, who are willing to provide, then we have an imbalance in the household as well. Yeah, because one hand can't clap. So when we're talking about transformation, that is a part of the re-socialization. The willingness to work should be taught at school. The fact that we no longer have things like apprenticeship program. From you there third form, as a boy, you should have go start work somewhere. As a girl,
as a boy and girl.
Right, no, that's what I'm going to say. Right, but
let me help you there.
When I say as a girl as well, but when I talk about the man and understanding the importance of work, we now have men, which is a part, is to be blamed. And, I hate to say it because remittances have been so good to us. But remittances are to be blamed for the whole heap of worthless, what my mother calls soft and man we have. Because now we have men that will sit down in Jamaica and wait for somebody to send him $50. And his mother and his girlfriend, who is toiling overseas, will send him $50, say him not for work at all. We have women who do it as well. But when it is
the remittances is the problem. We have to find a way to make sure that both our boys and our girls understand that is important.
If you cut this line, because remember, one of the things that we have to do, is to start saying how we're going to fix it. Every tub supposed to sit down from bottom.
Yeah, man. The only thing I would say to you, careful of causation and correlation. Yes. So one of the things that we have to do is to understand, identify the problems, but the conversation, which I'm coming back to you, is around coming up with the solutions. Yeah. Because sometimes you're going to create a wrong solution, and your brother always tell me that. Yeah. Yes, Damien, he's very good at enunciating that. If you don't really sit down and examine the cause and identify the proper cause, you may come up with the wrong solution. But what we do know, re-socialization is a part of the solution, but how and what you need to address in that re-socialization is going to be critical. You understand?
That's what you want to create.
And I agree with that. And so we have a little bit of difference in what we want to create, me and you. Yeah. Because I would have to tell you that in my family, the nurturer, the dominant nurturer in my family is my husband. The dominant nurturer in my family. I'm a nurturer. He's a nurturer, but he's the dominant nurturer in my family. And my children will tell you that. Because that's who he is, naturally. And that's who he was brought up to be. But that's okay. Sure. That's okay. It doesn't mean anything. And it works, but it is what you choose to do. The key is that nurturing must occur. And how it occurs and what role each one plays is a partnership. So for me, the bigger position is in the family. How do we create partnerships to cause parenting to occur? Partnerships cause parenting and not rules. Partnerships cause it. But I see you took up your mic several times. I want to give you a chance.
No, it's a fascinating discussion, and there are different ways to approach it. But I do think in terms of the whole re-socialization and social transformation, understanding the kind of society we want is very important. But maybe we can assume we want a well-adjusted, inclusive society which provides opportunities to as many of our people as possible, and where there's an absence of discrimination against people, and where we're caring and loving towards each other. And I think we could have a discussion and describe what we want. But in terms of how we re-socialize and how we're going to deliver that, given that we all need to, we're all impacted by the socialization that we've been brought up with and that the society has had from we were born. Obviously, I think the state has a major role in how that happens, you know, in terms of trying to change the mindset, the values and attitudes around things like how we deal with conflict, how we deal with anger, how we deal with the perceived disrespect, the need to be tolerant, the need to be respectful of each other, the fact that if somebody says something you don't like about you, maybe the way to deal with that is not to react with violence, but rather to maybe step back and think about what's happened and how best to manage it in a way that doesn't create a worse situation, because we have a terrible problem with a bad act engendering another one, and then a third and a fourth, until you have a huge torrent and trail of disasters which have flowed from something that was actually relatively trivial. So I think the state must have an important role in trying to deal with the messaging. I think somebody said two is better than too many was a very effective messaging in the 1970s. I remember that. And I think that was driven by the state. And at that time we had family planning. We had subsidized contraception to try and get people to be able to manage their reproduction in a more autonomous and empowering way. And I think we have to think of the state and use the state in a way to help our society move forward and away from the problems that we now have.
I agree with you 100% there. So, Mark.
All right, so Jamaica signed on to a number of treaties, conventions that really and truly, when you explore them around other countries and implementing them, we really poor at the implementing part, the implementation of these things. So like when you look on like social workers, I remember when they did this bitter bill zone of special operations, and I looked on it and I said, boy, I really think this is too much executive privilege. When I see this social workers part, I say, but this is something that is needed. But then listening to the two educators, how they function as social workers at school, I'm thinking, if we look on the number of hours that you spend home, as opposed to being at school, interacting with your peers, we know that a large part of socialization takes place there. You have probably, at most, some schools have 2 guidance counselors, so 2,000 odd picking. That really and truly, you see the guidance counselor once for the week, more than likely for 45 minutes, because only one session the guidance counselor get. Now, you look on that, should teachers at the moment, when you think about, I'm training a teacher, should we train our teachers to also be social workers? Is it that you're demanding that? Just as though we can say that we want to have more STEM programs in schools, can we then say that we want 2 courses to be a part of the curriculum for teachers who are persons are practicing to be teachers? Because really and truly, if you look on everything that they deal with, it's not only lessons them I deliver, they're delivering, mothering, fathering, every single thing. So they too themselves must be training in so that we can deliver these things that we want to see for our country.
I agree with you. In fact, I'd want to see, and Mark said it, it's not just in their interaction with the children and giving them the tools to have the conversation, but also identifying the parents that they also need to have that conversation with, to begin to make that interaction different and get them to understand how differently they can have the conversation with one another.
Given the depth and the type of problems that we have as a nation, when you look at the school curriculum and children entering from a young age and leaving, 16, 17, 18, some of them going on further study, surely that ought to include a large component of trying to socialize ourselves into a very positive and empowering frame of mind and addressing the problems we have. And rather than just focusing on the nuts and bolts of the traditional subjects, because we need to empower our people with life skills, thinking skills, social skills, self-esteem, self-belief. We have all these problems with complex issues around self-esteem because of our racialized past, our brutal past, and so on. Gender-related issues, there's a lot that we have to unpack and reorder in a way that allows people to get ahead with their lives. And I think we really have to deal with the substance of things as well. We're too obsessed or too easily persuaded or impressed by form as a general construct, whether it be the passage of laws that aren't having the impact that they were designed to have, institutions that aren't delivering the way they should. We need to focus on substance, which is really where the rubber hits the road and which is often the more difficult thing to deal with. But unless we focus on that, we're not really making progress. And that's one of the things I would like to see Jamaica get more concerned about, substance over form.
And I tell you, my vision, and I talk about it all the time, the army of social workers. The vision that I have in my head of that is an army of social workers, of some 6,000 social workers who work from 2 till 10. They go into the schools at 2 o'clock. Our children stay at school till 6 o'clock. They don't go home until their parents are at home. And when they go home, what the parents have to do with them is to love them and enjoy them, not do homework with them. Because between 2 and 6, social worker is there with them, helping them to learn how to interact with each other, helping them to deal with the conflicts, helping them to deal with their extracurricular activities, helping them to deal with them homework called independent work. I would like to call it homework. My name is independent work. Because there should be no homework. You should not have any work to do when you reach home. And then when the social worker leaves there at 6 o'clock, they go into the communities, and social workers have a team of whether it be 50 families that are assigned to them that they must visit and work with and connect them to the systems that we have. There are many people. There's a lady who is on PATH in Mitchelltown. They put the PATH onto the NCB card. It now work for her. 1 year, she don't collect her PATH. 1 year she don't collect her PATH. But no, so I find out, and I'm here trying to connect her with it while I'm doing my job at JMMB, while I'm doing my politics. I don't have that. But if I had a social worker who was there on the ground with her, know so she should never get connected to PATH, know that she have a problem with her boyfriend and see this is a domestic violence thing here, so you can go and sort it out. Here is the dispute resolution. Because we have a lot of programs out there that people don't know how to connect to. And we can't make them work because nobody can connect in with them. If we are focused on making sure that we can connect our people, and then we will know if the program really work or not because people will start to use them. We have a possibility inside of that vision.
I come back to wanting to make sure that we don't see the army of social workers as a panacea, because I also want to see the transference of some of the skills you expect from the social worker to the mother, to the teacher, to the father, and so on. So I think, and also, if you put some of those social workers, let us understand that when you talk about school, make us start down at kindergarten.
We are talking about basic school, right up.
So that you can
right through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man, that's where it starts. We have to do all it. So that's the truth of the matter is that, and as you say, the connection. Remember, we have National Parenting Support Commission. I just booked up my friend from National Parenting Support Commission in Portland, training parents. They have an extensive parent training program, but them only reach 100 people in the last year. 100 families.
They're not properly staffed.
And they're not properly staffed. It's not properly sorted out. So we need to work it through. We have a lot to talk about. But what we do know that we have to redefine our constructs. We have to redefine our society, and we have to create that vision of that society that we want. And if I were to just wrap up here, because I'm getting my 5-minute signal, I'm giving you all, right, 30 seconds for your last word so that we can do a little wrap up here of this very, very interesting conversation, which is the first of many, because as you say, Angela, it's conversation that's going to change it and shift it.
Thank you so very much for the opportunity, first and foremost. It has been a most riveting conversation. For me, Jamaica has a crisis of masculinity. If it is that we do not strengthen our boys and our men, we will be having this conversation 30 years from now. And so we must focus, and focus does not mean that we ignore our ladies, because anything that impact man, impact woman, right? But right now, if we have to speak about what is our major issue, the one that we have to fix right now before it destroys us, it is the crisis of men and masculinity. So let's start gearing our policies towards that.
As an educator, I would say thank you for that, social worker army. We are behind you. And, for me, I would say teachers are the ones playing the work of the social worker now. And that is why a lot of teachers are frustrated in the classroom. So having something like that in the education system would be a big help, because teachers would now no longer be nurturers at school, but would be able to nurture at their homes. Because
That would be so sad.
I know we would still nurture, but some of the burden would be lifted so we can carry some of the energy home. So, you know, for me going forward as an educator, that is what I would want to see. That social worker army really being implemented and working with the education system to ensure that we have men and women for the future.
All right, so evening again, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yes, always give love an opportunity to share and to interact with others, to learn more about how we can better shape society for each and everybody. Until we roll out the toolkit for our teachers and for our parents, so that we can re-socialize everybody into making our society one where from your day of primary, high school, I'm tell you about live, raise a family and all these beautiful things. Until we get that toolkit that can make things easy for that to happen, just look at yourself and say, what can I do to make life better for the person behind me, and what can I do to ensure that my actions doesn't necessarily negatively impact the generation to come. Just think justice, just think equality, just think kindness, just think love. And as a former prime minister would say, Portia, my girl, the word is love.
Okay, so thanks for having me once more. I would like to say we can start from the younger generation as early as kindergarten, as I said earlier. So as they grow, it will grow with them, how to treat others, how to interact, how to spread love, how to just listen, adapt, and just contribute better to society on a whole. And I think it starts from the younger age, and as they grow, it grows with them.
Thank you again for having me. Well, for me, I would want to see the social construct that we're talking about here to start from in the homes. I don't know how we're going to get it, if we're going to get the social workers to work on the parents first, and then when the parents learn, then the parents will pass it on to the children. Because when I look at society, and every day when you take up the newspaper or you go on social media and you see what is happening, I put it back down to poor, in some cases, not in all cases, down to poor parenting. So where in which we talked earlier on about having both parents in the house, and I think that if both parents is in the house and both of them are cooperating in changing the social construct, then we'll have a better Jamaica.
So I want to just say how grateful I am to be part of this conversation. You know, you're leaving with your mind going about some of these things that are really so important. For me, there are a couple of things. Yes, it is about conversation. It is about making sure our teachers, our parents, our pastors, everybody, our mothers, fathers, children, have the ability to entertain conversation where they're actually listening to one another and where they're actually valuing what the other person is saying. Whether it's an adult and a child speaking, you know, this thing, I can't even call you Georgia because me and you on a size, you know? Just simple things like those. I think that that is going to be important because you start at the very youngest age. From prenatal, we're supposed to be having those conversations. Kindergarten, we keep going. The army of social workers, I want to say it again, because the idea is to start with that army of social workers, but it is to get to a point where you actually don't need a social worker because every one of us is a social worker. So, for example, the teacher, I want teacher to continue to nurture our boys or girls when they come to school, just as how I want when they go to Sunday school for that nurturing to take place and wherever else you... or Sabbath, or Sabbath school, thank you for that, or Sabbath school, for that nurturing to take place. But I believe that it is important that we all recognize that we have that duty of nurturing. The other thing, we keep saying that to have both parents in the home, and I agree with that. But I think we also need to be careful that we also don't stigmatize those who can't have the two parents. Because sometimes having those two parents in the home is the worst thing for the child. Them not living good, them living like cat and dog, so it's better they go their separate ways. So what is important, I want to say, is that your boys, your girls, they both need that female in the home, and they both also need that male figure. Yeah? So they need both influences, but make we know that they don't have to necessarily be the father. It's a father figure, whether it is your brother that is playing it, your uncle or whatever. But I believe it is important to acknowledge that both those influences are required in building up a child.
Well, I just want to concur that this has been a very stimulating discussion. I want to thank you for inviting me and for putting on this event. It's very inspirational to hear our ladies speaking on these topics, and us disciplining ourselves to really listen and try and learn from them, because typically men are often try to dominate conversations and so on, and it's very important, I think, to give everybody a voice. So I want to thank you for that. This is going to be an ongoing discussion. So many issues have come out of this that aren't even entirely gender related, but are related to other things, but that are equally important and impact on gender and vice versa. So it's going to be important to continue this dialogue. But at the end of the day, I think what we have identified is that for us to move forward as a country, we need to have this re-socialization, and and that involves the family, giving more prominence and support to family life, and then ensuring that the partnerships are there and that each child has the benefit as much as possible of having both male and female figures in their life, playing a very wholesome role, nurturing them, guiding them, disciplining them in a positive way, in a well-informed way, so that we can produce the best possible citizens for our country who are able to maximize their talents and deal with the many, many challenges of life, which is not an easy thing. Thank you very much again.
Thank you all for joining us in this conversation. And if I would just add my own voice to what I would like to see, and when I think around gender in Jamaica and my vision for gender in Jamaica, I want to see that all Jamaicans see themselves as nurturers, protectors, and providers for their families, all Jamaicans, men and women, and that they feel so empowered that they can choose which role they would like to play in that construct, and that they can do it in a positive way, whether in the same home or in separate homes, to create children and citizens who can see themselves as self-assured and have a good identity. So that's our ideal that we're going to get there. There are going to be many pathways to that ideal. But once we hold that ideal, and once we are focused always on that ideal, we can create it. And at the base of that ideal is equality. It's that if we can get to a space of equalness in our society, and if we acknowledge that inequality in our society is driven by color, class, and gender, so that the person that experienced the biggest inequality in Jamaica is a black, poor woman, then if we acknowledge it, we will manage it and we will deal with it. And we have work to do. And I am so happy in our 84th year as the People's National Party to understand that we are here as a listening leadership, to work together with the people. And I'm very happy to have been able to host our leader, because his humility in this process is what allows the listening. And our chair, because of her resolve to ensure that we have participation at the highest level, it facilitates this process. And O'Shane, as the youngest and as the male co-chair, because we have a female co-chair, because we are looking for gender parity, not for the emasculation, but the building up, of man and woman in our society, so that we can move forward and be, in fact, the place of choice to live, work, and raise our families. We are on that road, and come to conference on Sunday or listen to us on TV and hear, because you will hear from us some of the ideas that we are ready to go. I'm dying to hear party leader's speech. Thank you very much. And thank you very much online. This has been Orange Table Talk. And please like and share. To all of those on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and like us at PNP Women and at PNP. No, sir?
Jamaica PNP.
And Jamaica PNP. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, yes. And I would just like to, Sherry Lee Ralph, our own Sherry Lee Ralph, just won an Emmy Award. Yes. And she ended, I want her, very powerfully. And, her words, I am an endangered species, but I sing no victim song. I am woman. I am artist. I am entrepreneur. I am household worker. I am journalist. I am teacher. Right? And I know where my voice belongs.
Species, but I sing no victim song. I am a woman, I am an artist, and I know where my voice belongs.